Welcome to the Trigger One Talk podcast, where we have uncensored conversations, we exchange information, and we provide a bunch of resources for the listeners and the viewers. We are streaming worldwide on this podcast. You can watch these interviews in two places: Spotify, the free version, as well as our YouTube channel, which is my company's name, Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. I'm your Fire Medic CEO host, LP. We got the wonderful, the brilliant Dr. Maiysha Clairborne back for part 3 of our series talking about primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. This episode is going to be focused on the modalities because, we always talk about modalities. It's not just trauma dumping here. Dr. Maiysha, sometimes when I'm talking, I cannot look at you because I know that your smile makes me smile. And I know sometimes I'll say stuff and you'll just start cracking up and then I want to laugh. So I'm purposely kind of got tunnel vision right now. I'm not even looking at you and stuff. I'm so excited because Dr. Maiysha is such a wonderful physician, even though you're not active in the ER, just like I'm not active on the ambulance or the fire truck anymore. We're still clinicians. We're clinicians to our core. We'll talk about that later because we got some stuff that's brewing or whatever. We're just going to blow y'all away at the end of 2024. Anyway, Dr. Maiysha, I'm going to keep my word. You have the mic. I want you to cover every modality that you can in a short time regarding primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. The mic is yours and the recording is on.
Of course, did you want to do your disclaimer?
If you're triggered at any time during this podcast and you need help immediately, see, she's such a producer. Good Lord. That's why I love educated Black women, because they keep you focused. Please call 911 if you have any issues with substance abuse, anything like that. We got all the information for NA and AA and Al-Anon. If you're suicidal, call 988 here in the United States, toll free, 24/7. And worldwide, you can call 143 or 999 or just Google your local emergency response numbers. That is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I want to honor your process. It's the most trauma informed. That's one of the things I love about this show is that it is what you do at the beginning, that disclaimer, that's a very trauma informed thing to do. And, we talked about primary and secondary and vicarious trauma in the last episode. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you for having me on a third time to, I got to tell my story. I get to talk about the thing that I love to talk about, trauma in the brain. I get to distinguish these 3 categories of trauma. And we didn't even get to the complexity, collective trauma, intergenerational trauma, cultural trauma, complex trauma. We could probably do more episodes on that. But
yes.
The thing about it is that it's important to understand that trauma is complex. Trauma is very complex, whether it's primary, whether it's secondary, whether it's vicarious. And whether it's complex, the cultural or intergenerational or collective, trauma is very complex. And it's important to then be willing to lead in with a lens, a trauma-informed lens. So when you are interacting with people, you mitigate or you avoid causing harm and you prevent causing harm in the people who have experienced trauma. And we have talked about this in the previous show, but trauma is universal. So everyone, 100% of people have had some experience that has landed in their body as trauma. So I think it's important for people to also understand the universality of trauma and to understand that what may not look like trauma to you may still be trauma to someone else. And what may land in your body as trauma may not seem like trauma to someone else, because trauma shows up differently in each individual person. And the level to which it impacts us is different based on our past experience, based on our upbringing, our cultural background, our filters that we talked about in that second session, the filters through which we live life. And so the reason I think that's important is because I heard recently someone say, well, we some things that people talk about are really trauma. And I had to level set that person to say, well, you can't say that because you don't live in their skin, you don't walk in their shoes, you don't have their background. Trauma lands in each person, in each person's body differently. So that kind of leads me into talking about this space of the trauma informed journey and how we manage when people get activated. Like, what is the most trauma informed or trauma responsive way to be when people get activated? So first, when we think about this whole lens of trauma and being trauma informed, first it's awareness. And you're aware, you're listening to this podcast, but the awareness is just understanding trauma. Trauma is universal. Trauma exists. And then you move into this sort of sensitivity. Trauma sensitivity is beginning to listen through that lens, listen with the understanding of the universality of trauma. And then you move into the trauma informedness. And that's when you begin to incorporate the skills in communicating, skills in listening. And even if you're at the organizational level, then you move into trauma, what we call trauma responsiveness, which is applying those tools and applying them at a larger level, right? So if you're in an organization or if you're a leader in an organization, this is sort of that journey, and each person can go through that journey and organizations can go through that journey. And what that creates is a level of safety, because as we talked about, our system gets primed for threat. And so this leads me into, I talk a little bit about the interrelatedness between being trauma informed and creating safety, creating psychological safety. A lot of people, when they think about safety, they think about the physical safety. But sometimes the feeling of physical unsafety comes first through the feeling of psychological unsafety, or the feeling of emotional unsafe. And so when people are feeling unsafe, for example, there's a lot around the Black community and mistrust in healthcare, mistrust in medicine, because of historically the historical trauma that has been laid upon us. That trauma has been passed down. That's intergenerational trauma. That trauma is passed down epigenetically and historically. And so when you look at that, and you look at now how many Black people can interact with the healthcare system, either number one, they're not going to be completely forthright with their provider or their doctor, or they're going to avoid the healthcare system altogether, which leads to problems with equity of healthcare. So that's just an example of what happens when you have a group of people who don't experience psychological safety in the room with a person who's supposed to care for them. We can map that on to the police, the community of policing, and how my point being, there is a very integrated relationship between understanding and being able to have the skills of being trauma informed and creating psychological safety for the connection between the interconnectedness of people. And so I'll talk a little bit about, people could be like, well, what the heck is psychological safety? So I'll talk about that, and then I'll kind of veer over to what I like to talk about around managing when people get activated. So this piece of psychological safety, it came out of this woman's research, Amy Edmondson, and then there was another, what's this author's name, wrote another book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. I'll look that up in a moment. And essentially, when people feel, there's the 4 things. People feel safe to learn, safe to express, safe to make mistakes, and then safe to challenge. Those are the 4 areas where psychological safety can occur. And if one of those is missing, then a person will potentially keep to themselves. They might experience personal harm. They might experience a sense of isolation, a sense of not feeling valued or heard. And so when we start to look at, well, what are the things that go into those 4 stages of psychological safety? What are the things that go into creating psychological safety? And, our communication, verbal and nonverbal, is a major thing. And so the first thing is the listening. It's the listening, because our listening, it drives our behavior. So I talked about in the previous episodes how our brain has all these filters. And when we're listening through our own experiences of trauma, when we're listening through our own lenses and experience, and we're speaking through that lens, and someone else is listening through their own lens, you can see how there would be a missed communication. So the first thing that really has to get dealt with is the listening. And listening comes in all, I like to think that listening comes in all forms, in a lot of different forms. Most people, when they think of listening, think of hearing the sound waves of my voice go into their ears. But it really is much more than that. You can listen with your eyes. And that's just noticing. That's just the powers of observation. So if someone becomes activated, if you're talking, you're in communication, and this is like, not even if there's a huge event that happens, but you could be talking to someone like I'm talking to you, LP. And there could be something I say, there could be a tone of voice, and suddenly in your body, you feel that sense of what's going on. And it may not be apparent to me if I'm not looking, if I'm not listening, if I'm not watching your body language. So the noticing is the very first thing. Noticing with our eyes, noticing in change with our ears, noticing through change of tone of voice, noticing the listening. All right. So then, so now you notice, now what? Well, then you actually name what you notice. I notice something has shifted. And this is a lot of what I teach in sort of like the trainings that I do. You name what you notice. Now, you have to be careful when you're naming what you notice, because remember, you're listening through filters and you're speaking through filters. A lot of times we name the interpretation of what we notice, not what we notice. We name the interpretation. So I might say, you seem mad, but that's my interpretation. That may not be what's actually happening. I noticed a change in your voice. I noticed a shift in your body posture. I noticed a shift in your energy. So you notice, and that you name, and you could name experience. You could name the perceived experience. It looks to me like you might be upset. Is that what you follow that with a question? Is that what's happening? Right? And so then the next thing to do, so like, depending on where the conversation goes, and all of these things, what they do is they open the conversation. They open the conversation so that what happens is if someone's activated, if they're triggered, is what people say, right? I use the word activation. I think I've shared that before. If someone's
I love that.
Yeah. If someone's activated in their trauma and you notice and you name it, that in and of itself, it gives them space, right? It gives them space to be. And then you can normalize it. You can, it's like giving them space to breathe. Like, it's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong. You know how people would say, oh, don't feel sad. Oh, don't feel angry. Like, that's the antithesis, right? To tell someone what to feel or what not to feel is only going to deepen their activation. But to say, you know what, I got that. You are feeling, it's almost like a recreation. It's an acknowledgement. It's okay. And then once you do that, then you can really begin to sort of help them navigate. Or if this is happening to yourself. So if it's happening to yourself, you notice what's going on in your body. You name what's going on in your body. Oh, okay, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling fear. If you don't know what you're feeling, pull out the emotions wheel.
The emotions wheel.
I love the emotions. Oh, man. If you Google feelings wheel, or emotions wheel.
Or what?
Or emotions wheel.
Okay.
Google one of those. And there'll be like a whole plethora of images that come up. You can just screenshot that and keep it on your phone. And so if you don't know, because a lot of people can't connect to what they're feeling, especially in those dysregulated moments. So if you need to, you could just, okay, you notice in your body something's happening, and sometimes for some people who have not done a lot of work with noticing their emotions, it could take them from 0 to 10. So if you're doing this for yourself, you can notice what's in between. Even if you go from 0 to 10, when you reflect later, you can say, well, okay, I went to 10 on the anger. What was I feeling just before that? Just kind of go back and go backwards. What was I feeling before that? Maybe it was frustration. What was I feeling? Or maybe it was I was feeling unheard. Or maybe I was feeling helpless. Or maybe I was feeling, there could be feelings that led up to that anger. And when you begin to do that kind of work, then you can notice the experience of your body before it gets to 10. And then you can name that. And this is how you begin to learn how to regulate yourself before you get to 10, right? So then if you're managing with someone else, you kind of normalize. And I think that gives also the space of self-forgiveness. Of course, if you're normalizing it with yourself, it gives a little bit of the space of self-forgiveness. If you cause harm in your activation, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but whatever you mess up, you can clean up.
Okay.
So I'll just say that. Now move on. So then once and that's part of the navigation, right? So then it's like you recognize, okay, this is what's happening. It's okay that this is happening. You look around, I'm safe. Or if you don't feel safe, whether it's psychologically, emotionally, or physically, you remove yourself from the situation. So that's navigation. That's the navigate. You have a choice. So I'll give you an example because I'm a mom and the kids have all your buttons. So last night I had a call a call with a client, and my son knows when I'm on call to knock on the office door before he comes in. Now my son is 9, so impulse is still a developmental stage in impulse. So he comes in the first time, asks me a question, random question. I answer it. I say, okay, go close the door. I'm in a call. And then he does it a second time. And I say, okay, I need you to not interrupt me. I'm on a call. And then he does it a third time. And 3 is a magic number for me. And so I say, listen, son, go out the door and try it again. And so then he goes out the door, he knocks, he comes in, he asks the question. And I say, now I need you to not come back in here again. Period. Close my door until I'm out of the room. So now I finished my call. I'm clearly activated, and he's upset because he's like, I'm just trying to ask you a question. I'm just trying to, and I'm like, just get out the office so I can finish my call. That's all I need you to do right now. So now we're both activated. We're both irritated. And so after the call, we're and he's talking a little smack, and I'm like, boy, So he's going to bed. He's like, I don't understand why you. And I said, you know what, son? I'll be back. I gotta leave the room now. So here's what happened. I noticed that there was something happening in my body, and I noticed if I let it go on too long, I was gonna scream at him. Okay. And so, having noticed that, named it in my mind, named it out loud. Look, I am getting irritated, more than irritated. I said, I'm going to go out of the room and calm down. I'll be back. And I just got up, navigation, like walked out, made a choice, self-regulated, did whatever, took a shower, did all the things I needed to do. And then that was the nurturing part. So the last thing is nurturing, and that's like self-care. Like, what do you need to do to take care of yourself? So I needed to take care of him too, because I didn't want to be yelling at him. I don't want to be traumatizing him. I don't want to parent from my trauma.
That's right.
So then once I regulated, I came back and I said, okay, I'm ready for my hug and kiss. You ready? And you know what he says to me? He says, Mommy, I'm sorry that I kept interrupting your call. And I'm sorry that I was talking smack. And I was like, oh, so, I gave him the hugs and the kisses, and I said, I forgive you. And, and then we had a conversation. What can I do to help you in the future? And that's like, see how that opens the conversation. And that's a small example, but you'd be surprised, parenting from trauma, that happens all the time. right?
Yes.
Well, that's really, that's like one of the big tools. And I say, just to simplify it, you listen with care. And care is an acronym. Connect, right? So you connect with the person. That's the noticing, that's the connect, then you acknowledge what's going on. All right. So that's the naming. You acknowledge it. That's the naming and normalizing. You acknowledge, I see this happening. Then you recreate them, right? That's part of the normalize as well. You recreate, like, it seems to me like, and I know this must be frustrating for you, and whatever that is, whatever they tell you, you say it back to them so that they know that you're listening. And that way you can empower. You can empower the next steps. You can empower the conversation.
You give such great information, and I absolutely love it. We may have to do an extended interview to deep dive into this a lot more, and that's okay, because that's just what we do. I want you to tell people how they can get in touch with you, but before that, what is one therapeutic thing that people can do if they are in therapy to talk about their primary, secondary, or vicarious traumas? What can they say as an approach to their therapist? Like, hey, I'm dealing with these one of three things. I don't know what to do with it. Like, how can you help me as a therapist?
It's just such a great question. I think sometimes people can name that they have trauma and sometimes they can't. So what I would suggest is, if you know that there could be some trauma influencing you, you could say, hey, you know what? I feel like there's some trauma influencing my behavior. How can you help me? Very simple. Or, I'm dealing with some things and I'm having a challenge. If you can't name it, it's fine. I am dealing with some things and I think that I'm self-sabotaging, or I think there's something in my past that's blocking my way. How can you help me? Because it's a therapist's job to kind of uncover the trauma.
That's it, folks. We're going to let you go, Dr. Maiysha. We'll have you come back because we're going to continue this series on primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. Dr. Maiysha Clairborne, I'll have all her links in the show notes. I want to thank you so much. I miss you so much. We're going to continue this conversation on air, off air. You go ahead and do what you got to do. I'm going to do this missing person case under our true crime theme. Dr. Clairborne, much love to you. Safe travels. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much again. Yes,
we got 30 seconds before it's 3 o'clock. I'm telling you, like, we're done.
I'm done. You did it. You did it. I appreciate it. But I do want to thank you. I want to give you your props. I appreciate everything that you do. I appreciate your show and how you give information and how you empower people. So I just want to, I can't leave the show without giving you your flowers and saying how much I appreciate you. And yes, we got lots of work to do together and we have more podcasts to bring.
That's right. We're out.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
As we wrap up this wonderful episode, I want to cover a story that is part true crime unsolved. The other part is the killer or killers of this young lady are not known. We don't know if it's one or more people. Similar to what we used to do when we started the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, we would cover a missing person case. And if that person or those individuals who killed the person that we covered are not known, we would still cover that case because it's an unsolved true crime case. We do both of those things now. I want to play this video. I got the name of this young lady from Mrs. LP. I found a video on the story on YouTube, so I want to post a link to this story in the show notes. But I want to play this video, and it's not that long.
My name is Renee Suazo, the brother of Eva Suazo. The death of my sister has tormented my family for almost going on 3 decades. It's a pain that you can't even explain when you're missing someone every day. The law has not been on our side, and they have not seeked no justice. But we all know that what we do here, we pay here. We all got to answer to the high almighty God. So with that being said, I miss my sister every day. Every day. I was only 10 years old. She died when she was 15. That's a pain that I don't feel like nobody should ever go through, and I wouldn't wish that pain on anybody. But when death come knocking on your door, it hits for real. But I just want to say, whoever did that to my sister, I still pray for you. And hopefully one day they can find it in their heart to try to make amends with the Lord, because that's all we got to answer to at the end of the day. But I love my sister, and I rep her every day of my life. I got her tatted on my arm, and that's not going nowhere until it's my time. Swazzles, we strong people. We're gonna live forever. You know what I'm saying? As far as like with her spirit. Thank you.
If you visit Soundview Park in the Bronx section of New York City, chances are you'll find people walking their dogs or going for a morning jog, maybe playing a game of soccer or a game of basketball. This comes off like a park like any other, but the truth is that Soundview Park has a dark history, known as a location where a lot of bodies have been found over the decades, and where some of the most brutal assaults have taken place. Known as a location where crime is run rampant, and some of the stories that you might have heard about that took place in Soundview Park still remain unsolved. We're here to talk about one of those stories today. A case that has sat with a family for nearly 3 decades, and so far, there's been no information since. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is the story of Ava Suazo.
Ava Suazo was born on June 8th of 1980 in the Bronx section of New York City.
Ava and her family spent time in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx before moving to Longfellow Road in the Tremont section of the Bronx. Ava's father was the super at the building that they lived in. Ava's parents moved from Honduras to New York City in hopes of a better future for their family, and they were doing exactly that, doing everything they could to give their kids a good life. Ava and her family were some of many in the Garifuna community, a population of people coming from the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, with deep roots in African ancestry. As of today, areas of the Bronx hold more than 100,000 individuals from Guatemala and Honduras in the Garifuna community.
Ava would attend IS 74 and graduate before attending Adlai Stevenson High School, where she made plenty of friends and she did very well.
Those close to Ava had grown used to her big smile and her kind ways. Ava was described by those close to her as very sweet and very kind, and always in good spirits. According to those fortunate enough to know Ava, it was said that it was rare that she was seen alone in the neighborhood, since she had such a great relationship with her family. She could be seen with her brothers, her mother, and her father very often. Her mother was very strict, but only to the extent that she wanted her children to have the best future possible. She wanted Ava and her brothers to do well. Growing up in the Bronx in the late 80s and early 90s, she had every right to want to watch her children, since the influence of the streets can sometimes be stronger than people think. While Ava was known to be very sweet, she was also known to be someone who couldn't be bullied or spoken to a certain way. She would stand up for herself. She respected those who respected her. Ava had no enemies, and she was very much adored by those around her. But one day, in the spring of 1996, Ava just up and vanished. Nobody had seen or heard from her, which of course was very unusual. This wasn't something Ava would do. Ava wasn't contacting her family at all, and that's when her parents would report her missing on Monday, April 29th of 1996.
On Tuesday, April 30th of 1996, 2 men were walking through right here in Soundview Park. And while they'd taken this walk many times before, this day was different, because this time they stumbled upon a horrific discovery.
The 2 men found themselves face to face with a dead body. The body that they found was thought to have been that of a 25-year-old woman at first. The young woman had been slain in cold blood, shot 4 times in the chest and once in the head. She was shot a total of 5 or 6 times, and her body was left there to be discovered later. The 2 men who discovered the body would later read in the Daily News that the body that they found wasn't of a 25-year-old woman, and instead just of a 15-year-old high school student. They remembered seeing a book bag on the ground not far from the crime scene, and that's how they were able to identify that this was the body of Ava Suazo. Till this day, whoever did this to Ava still hasn't been held accountable. While there were never any real leads, one theory was that seeing as how Ava didn't have any enemies, maybe she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and maybe it was a case of mistaken identity. While that might be possible, Ava's brother strongly believes that she was set up, and that others out there might know the truth about what happened that day. Those who were close to Ava can't imagine that anybody would ever want to do any harm to her. I'd like to thank the friends and family of Ava Suazo who came forward to provide details. Specifically, thank you to Ava Suazo's mother, her brother, and her friend Ed. When it comes to the case of Ava Suazo, this is still an unsolved case. Ava's family has been waiting for years for answers and hasn't received almost anything. Her family often hold vigils for her in her memory, and they march to the spot where she was found almost 3 decades ago. Ava's mother promises that she won't ever rest until her daughter's killer is brought to justice. Her family strongly believes that someone out there knows something, and they're pleading that they come forward one day with any information. Rest in peace, Ava Suazo. You aren't forgotten. To anybody who might know any information on the Ava Suazo case, you're urged to contact authorities, and you can do so anonymously. Let's help give this family some closure.
So that's the story about the 1996 cold case that's unsolved to this day about Ava Suazo. If you have any information about the whereabouts, good, bad, or ugly, concerning Ava Suazo, call 1-800-577-TIPS. Again, 1-800-577-T as in Tom, I as in Igloo, P as in Peter, S as in Sam. That case needs to be solved. If you have any information, please call that number, and you can leave that information that you're calling about anonymously also. In closing, live in awareness, never live in fear. Take a first aid, CPR, AED class. I teach all of those, and we can make arrangements to come to where you are. We travel across the country teaching those classes. We want you to be an immediate responder because you may not be able to get access in person to a first responder depending on the situation, especially if it's a violent critical incident. We want you to be a by-doer instead of being a bystander, as my man Doc Pagans always talks about, and be aware of situational awareness always. For the Trigger One to Talk podcast and Dr. Maiysha Clairborne, LP out.